Hello, my name is Adam Goss. I am 22 years old studying computer science at CSU, and I grew up in the town of Brush, Colorado, population 5,000. I consider myself to have been a typical kid, enjoying bike rides, playing in the dirt, and building things with Legos. My upbringing was typical in many ways too. I had a dad, for example, who brought home the bacon and provided for our family. My dad also enjoys telling stories and laughing, something that I think might be a part of me too. I also had a mom who, on the other hand, stayed at home and held down the fort. My mom is one of the few people I know who sings while doing laundry and is also one of the happiest people I know too. I also have a sister, Sarah, who is 20 months younger than me, smarter, and one of the best runners I know. By the time I was a year old, my favorite question had become, "What's that?" And I've always been curious. By the age of 5, I started kindergarten. Thompson Elementary was a K through 1st grade school of primarily white students with a Hispanic minority. My elementary years are but a blur now, but they do have their memorable incidents. In 1st grade, I was asked to stay in for recess because I was talking too much during music class. To me, this was the end of the world, but eventually I moved on. I was widely oblivious to the hardships other kids faced at home. Looking back with wisdom of the years, I like to pick apart an incident in 1st grade where a kid had gotten some new crayons. I can remember them as clearly today as I did then. They were a 64-count box of Crayola crayons with what seemed like to both of us an endless array of color possibilities. I asked him if I could use a particularly unique shade of green, and he obliged. My teacher saw this and pulled me aside and told me that I had my own crayons and that I didn't need to use his. Piecing other similar memories together, I can't help but thinking that he may have been a poor student and my teacher was just helping to protect his school resources. This incident is open to interpretation, but the key takeaway is that when I was little, I was clueless as to what the lives of other kids were like. With each passing grade, I became less naive and less oblivious to these differences. On a whole, however, Brush was an okay community. With fiscal support from passage of a local vote to increase taxes, 2nd grade brought on a new school, Beaver Valley, and a new chapter in my education. Beaver Valley had a brand new iMac computer lab, a library with plenty of books, an art room with a pottery kiln, music classes, a gym, and all the classrooms that a growing community could want. A few of these classrooms I never visited because they were reserved for ESL students and students with disabilities. It wouldn't be a few years later down the road until I would actually understand what those rooms were for then. Brush Middle School and Brush High School facilitated the last 7 years of my education, teaching a widely Eurocentric curriculum. When our school talked about privilege and oppression, it was periodic and random. For example, one unit from a freshman history course introduced us to Cesar Chavez, who fought for the rights of migrant farm workers in California and Florida. In 7th grade, our reading teacher had us write a diary from the perspective of a character from the Christopher Paul Curtis book, The Watsons Go to Birmingham. The novel is centered on an African-American family and their life in 1963 America. Projects like these provided us with cultural insights to places unlike Brush, but they weren't the same influx a student would get simply by going to a school, say, in Harlem, for example. In a nutshell, Brush has all the problems that come with a small town. The people here are nice enough, murders don't happen and theft is rare. People aren't radical, and the ones who are racist don't do anything violent about it. The biggest ethnic issue in our community is in fact probably not really an issue at all. Over the last few decades, a large Hispanic population has moved to the area due to an abundance of jobs at a packing plant in the neighboring town of Fort Morgan 10 miles away. By the time I graduated, the ethnicity of my class had changed from mostly white when I was in kindergarten to a significantly closer half white and half Hispanic. If this event had happened in the 1960s like the time the Birminghams grew up in, the transition may not have been as smooth. However, one thing I loved about our schools were that the students and teachers were accepting and created a generally good environment to learn in. I never so much as noticed that the ethnicities of my classes were gradually shifting from more white to around half white. This speaks volumes to me about what kids can accomplish when they quit caring about race. Race not being an issue, the only other hot topic in Brush was money. Even though taxpayers supported the schools, budgets were always tight and fundraising was an integral part of most extracurricular activities. Brush is a typical small school with small school budget problems. Activities that were integral to graduation didn't cost students, but AP classes, affiliated college credits, and clubs sometimes were accompanied by a small fee. All in all, I spent 13 years in the Brush School District, and of those 13 years, one was extra special. The grade was 5th, and my teacher was Mr. Blumker. His classroom was quite unordinary. He had a full-size wooden castle in the back with lofts for reading and nooks filled with computers. His desks were custom-built and arranged in a giant O shape, all connecting together. He had aquariums, terrariums, projectors, microscopes, films, plants, and posters filling every crack of the room. Mr. Blumker was the real-world Albus Dumbledore. Not the fierce Michael Gambon Dumbledore of most of the Potter films, but the kind, wise Richard Harris Dumbledore from the first 2 films. I could go on and on about the things that made Mr. Blumker a great teacher, but the thing that made him the greatest is something that I think everyone who wants to be a teacher should aspire towards. It's this simple understanding that people are people and that nobody's perfect all the time. I did plenty of stupid things when I was in 5th grade. In fact, one of the stupidest was when Austin Powers came out and I accidentally referred to him as "Hey Baby." Very embarrassing. But the bottom line is, Mr. Blumker never once made me feel stupid for being in his classroom. He let me grow through the awkward moments of being youth while being encouraging and supportive at the same time. If anybody could understand something about Mr. Blumker from this little brief blip that you get to know him through me, understand that all you have to do sometimes is listen. And to be there to open doors for those when they're ready to be opened.
Off with Space Shuttle Endeavour, preparing our home in space for a larger international family.
Houston now controlling.
Houston Endeavour, roll program.
Roger, roll, Endeavour.
Commander Chris Ferguson confirming Endeavour is rolling on course for a rendezvous with the International Space Station. Speed 1,000 miles an hour. Altitude 1 mile. Downrange distance 6.5 miles from Kennedy Space Center already. Throttling down to 72% of the rated thrust as the shuttle goes through the realm of maximum air.